All right, forget the Hollywood myths. In this explainer, we're stripping away all that popular folklore to dive straight into the gritty, unvarnished historical reality of the Battle of the Alamo. You know, for so many of us, this event is just a symbol of legendary sacrifice, totally fueled by movies and pop culture. But today, we're relying strictly on the historical record. We're going to uncover the sheer and honestly terrifying brutality of what actually happened at that makeshift fortress back in 1836. So, what really happened during those infamous 13 days of the Alamo? What actually went down during the standoff? When you remove the romanticized legends? I mean, how did a small garrison even end up trapped in an old Spanish mission in the first place? And what were the exact ground-level tactics that led to their total destruction? Well, to answer that, we kind of have to rewind just a bit.
Which brings us to Section 1, Beyond the Alamo Legend, The Gathering Storm.
To really understand this battle, you have to look at the massive political collision course that sparked the Texas Revolution. It was basically driven by two completely incompatible visions. On one hand, you have a newly centralized Mexican government under President Antonio López de Santa Anna. They had just replaced their Federalist Constitution with a unitary republic, and they were looking to strictly enforce national laws, restrict illegal U.S. immigration, and completely eliminate the practice of slavery. But clashing directly with that, you have the Anglo immigrants and local Tejanos living in Texas. They were absolutely determined to maintain their semi-autonomous way of life, keep their local political power, and preserve their economic systems, which, yes, for many of the colonists, heavily relied on the institution of slavery. So it was just a profound head-on collision of two totally different futures for the region.
All right, fast forward to Section 2, the 13-day siege, the ticking clock. The ticking clock really starts in late February 1836. Imagine this. A small garrison suddenly finds themselves trapped inside a sprawling 3-acre former mission as a massive army rolls into San Antonio de Bexar. When you track the timeline, it's just an agonizing wait. On February 23rd, Santa Anna's forces absolutely shock the Texans by showing up a whole month earlier than anyone expected. Over the next 13 days, the Mexican army just inches their artillery batteries closer and closer and closer. They're bombarding the Alamo day and night, while the desperate Texans are stuck waiting for a massive relief force that, well, we know is never going to come.
To put this into perspective, at its absolute maximum, the Alamo garrison consisted of only about 185 to 260 defenders. That's it. It was a vastly undermanned, wildly underprovisioned group. You had a mix of regular army men, local Tejanos fighting for greater local power, and recent American volunteers who literally just showed up in Texas looking for adventure or land. And this tiny group was tasked with defending a perimeter of almost a quarter of a mile. Now contrast that immediately with a staggering, terrifying number. General Santa Anna had amassed an estimated force of up to 3,100 Mexican troops in the town of Bexar by the end of the siege. Now, sure, many of them were inexperienced conscripts who had just suffered through a grueling, freezing winter march, but still, the sheer numbers presented an impossible mathematical problem for the guys inside the Alamo.
And let me tell you, the stakes literally could not have been higher. When the Mexican army arrived, Santa Anna raised a blood-red flag over San Antonio. This was a direct signal of the Tornell Decree. It was a policy approved by the Mexican Congress that officially defined irregular foreign invaders as pirates. And back in this historical period, that meant one very specific thing: no quarter. There would be absolutely no prisoners taken and zero mercy shown. Surrender literally meant death.
This brings us right into Section 3, Victory or Death, the Desperate Plea. You really have to consider the psychological toll here. You've got freezing weather, continuous bombardment, and the terrifying realization that nobody is coming to save you. In his legendary letter to the world, Alamo commander William B. Travis made it crystal clear: "I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible and die like a soldier, victory or death." They were absolutely willing to die to protect their positions, but, and this is a huge but, history shows us that suicide was never their actual goal. They were holding what they truly believed was a vital strategic post, and they were constantly pleading for reinforcements. They accepted the risk of death for sure, but they desperately, desperately wanted to win. After 13 agonizingly slow days, we hit Section 4, 90 minutes of slaughter, the final assault. So the Mexican artillery suddenly stops on the night of March 5th. This deafening, eerie silence finally allows the exhausted Texans to fall into a deep sleep. But it's the calm before the storm. In the pitch-black, freezing pre-dawn hours of March 6th, Santa Anna unleashes a devastating 4-column attack. He orders almost 1,800 assault troops to overwhelm the fortress from all sides simultaneously.
The men were actually forbidden from wearing their overcoats so they could move faster, and they advanced completely silently in the dark.
The initial assault it was chaotic and profoundly brutal. Mexican sentinels silently took out the Texan guards who were sleeping outside the walls. And as the charge officially began, inexperienced Mexican recruits in the back rows started firing blindly in the dark, tragically shooting their own frontline troops. Inside, the Texans woke up to the sounds of bugles and screaming. They started firing cannons loaded with literally anything they could find: door hinges, nails, chopped up horseshoes, basically turning their cannons into giant shotguns. But the sheer weight of the numbers was just too much. General Amador scaled the 12-foot north wall where the defenses were crumbling. Commander Travis was killed super early in the fight, shot right while defending that northern perimeter. The walls were breached.
And from there, the nightmare escalated incredibly fast. The fighting shifted off the walls and straight into the dim, cramped rooms of the long barracks and the chapel. Guys, this was no longer a battle. It was a terrifying, close-quarter slaughter. The Texans barricaded themselves in dark rooms, so Mexican troops just wheeled captured cannons right up to the heavy wooden doors, blasted them off their hinges, fired a volley of muskets into the smoke, and charged in with bayonets. James Bowie, who was ravaged by a terrible illness, was killed right in his sickbed. And the very last defenders to fall were the artillery crew, making a desperate, brutal final stand inside the church itself. It is absolutely shocking to realize that after almost 2 weeks of mounting, unbearable tension, the actual massacre of the entire garrison was completely over in just an hour and a half, just 90 minutes. By 6:30 in the morning, the bugles sounded the retreat, and every single Texan combatant was dead. Which brings us to Section 5, Remembering the Alamo, the Bloody Cost and Legacy. As the sun came up, the grim reality of that no-quarter policy fully set in. Santa Anna ordered the execution of the handful of surviving combatants who had actually tried to surrender, enforcing his decree to the letter. But the blood price paid that morning is staggering when you look at the actual numbers. Yes, Santa Anna got his tactical victory. He wiped out somewhere between 182 and 257 Texans. But he lost an estimated 400 to 600 of his own troops, killed or wounded, just to capture an irregular fortification that his own senior officers had strongly advised him not to storm. It was a massive and arguably totally unnecessary casualty rate. Now, not everyone was killed. Santa Anna intentionally spared a few non-combatants. Susanna Dickinson and her infant daughter, a few local Tejano women, and Travis's enslaved man Joe were released. Santa Anna gave them a blanket and $2 each and explicitly sent them eastward for one reason: to spread terror. He wanted them to tell the rest of Texas that the Mexican army was completely unbeatable. And you know what? It worked initially. This sparked a massive, panicked civilian evacuation that became known as the Runaway Scrape. But here is the ultimate historical irony of the whole thing. That 13-day delay at the Alamo, it bought Texas politicians the crucial time they needed to officially declare independence and draft a constitution. On top of that, the brutal slaughter of the garrison, which was entirely meant to crush the rebellion, ended up providing the ultimate motivation for General Sam Houston's retreating army. Fueled by absolute outrage and a deep desire for retribution over the massacres at the Alamo and later at Goliad, Texan forces completely turned the tables. On April 21st, 1836, they ambushed Santa Anna's camp at the Battle of San Jacinto. Screaming, "Remember the Alamo," they utterly defeated the Mexican army in a mere 18 minutes, captured Santa Anna himself, and officially secured their independence. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this one thought. When we finally strip away all that Hollywood folklore and actually face the sheer, unvarnished brutality of history, the complex politics, the freezing conditions, the terrifying 90-minute close-quarter slaughter in the pitch dark, does the true story actually become even more fascinating than the myth? History is rarely simple, but it is always incredibly revealing. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning the legends.